it was interesting that you bring John Mayer up because I was taking notes because I do another series on my channel called Album Reviews where like I believe that creativity drives creativity. So like when or art begets art. So when you listen to something new, it creates it, fills your inventory of creativity and like it helps you be more creative. So I've been intentionally trying to listen to new things, but I've also been trying to make the most of it and make videos about what I'm making, right? So like I listen to a new album and be like, hey, this is what I learned or thought or found interesting about the album. So I was taking notes, and one of the notes that I put for Jeff Buckley's Grace album was the fact that I could hear, I think the album came out in 94, I believe, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I could hear the influence of things after the fact. And I'm not saying that it was directly influenced by the album, but culture and the musical culture in general that might have been created through that. Like I heard a lot of Nirvana in there. I don't know when the Nirvana time was, but like exactly like the years. But I heard some Nirvana influence. I heard Alanis Morissette influence. And then thirdly, I heard John Mayer influence. Like in that, like meaning in John Mayer's music, I was like, oh, this Jeff Buckley album kind of sounds like John Mayer, which means, Room for Squares didn't come out for another couple of years. So like, it was just interesting to hear all those like influences. And I was like, just cool going back. And it's interesting that the thread that's kind of continuing is like, oh, well, you played on Jeff Buckley's, now it's, John Mayer, just continuing the thread. It was just an interesting, I don't
Yeah,
know.
Jeff Buckley's not the kind of artist, and I think there's a lot of reasons, in a way, really good reasons that you haven't really had occasion to hear it, because that record, Grace, wasn't really mainstream successful. It wasn't that widely relatable. But
Mm,
it seems like it was something that people really liked, who were, kind of specifically biased towards just really being into music.
yeah.
So the musical community seemed to respond overall
Mm,
really well to it. But that, in terms of the Gen Pop, there were quite a lot of fans, but like it didn't necessarily. I think probably the reason for that, just from a zoomed out perspective, is that it didn't so much fit into pre-existing genres as it kind of was more fertilizing, or it was fertile or kind of leavening for the overall culture that generates genres. It was sort of like not something that had a very unifying quality about it. It
so
was more eclectic.
yeah, this is now the I guess we could say the third time that I've had this exact conversation this week because it's so interesting. Now you're bringing it up for like somebody else's third time. This idea of genre creators, and the way I want to go with this is the fact of like I've been really intrigued with the fact that like so many of these household names that we know weren't like super like crazy like they weren't crazy what's the word I'm looking for, like they didn't sell tremendous albums. And the fact that like I just finished the Bob Dylan biography, and they were talking about the fact that like by the time I think the 80s came around, Bob Dylan had released 20 albums. He was very widely known and very wildly famous. But when Michael Jackson's Thriller came out, Thriller sold 3 times the amount of Bob Dylan's entire discography. And I just that album sold entire, triple of Bob Dylan's biography. And it blew my mind because Bob Dylan's still regarded as one of the most influential songwriters in American culture, and everybody knows his name, but he wasn't nearly as commercially successful as Michael Jackson.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting you bring up, you say that about Jeff Buckley, but I would say still everybody, I would say he's a household name. Almost everybody, at least
Gotcha.
maybe
Yeah.
not necessarily the generations younger, but like at least my generation and older definitely know the name of Jeff Buckley. So what I find interesting is I think one of the effects, like the reasons for that is you're talking about how he didn't necessarily fit into a genre, and a term that I used in a different interview 3 days ago was this idea of the genre creators. So many of these artists that stick around don't necessarily fit into a genre. They kind of they put something out there that's so genre defining, and then after that, the influence of John Mayer, the influence of Alanis Morissette, come from that album that didn't necessarily fit anywhere. Like who would you
Yeah.
say who sounds like the Red Hot Chili Peppers? Like
Right.
nobody. You like, but that's why they've been around for 20 years, 30
That's
years. Like,
right.
and it's interesting. We're like so and so may be incredibly famous and sell more than the Chili Peppers, but like they don't have that lasting name because
Yeah.
they sound like whatever. They sounded like the Chili Peppers, so they'll never be
Yeah.
up there. It's just very interesting
Yeah.
that you bring it up.
This is very interesting. I think in a way there's like a beginning. Sorry. There's like, if you had to reduce the quality of your resolution of this particular subject down to like two, a kind of like two stages, a beginning or a front half and a back half. And you weren't allowed to be more specific. I think in terms of an artist's career, there's a first half and a second half. And that first half, I'd have to say, I think might be facilitated and by the necessity of being able to fulfill the role of a certain type of archetype within the mass psyche, right? So like, and I think, I don't know how many archetypes, like people say that you can only remember, or you can only have this many friends because you can only really engage with, maybe it's 1,000 people or whatever it is. Well, I don't know if psychologists have figured out exactly how many sort of archetypes or that a human psyche will tend to have ingrained, and then they will populate current people into those archetypes.
Oh, interesting.
Of somebody that I want to be, somebody that I never want to be,
yeah,
somebody that I think is cool, somebody I think is funny, somebody I think is scary, somebody who I think I should be ruled by, or somebody I think I should never be ruled by, someone who's a criminal, someone who's a saint. It's like, I don't know how many of these archetypes exist, but there's probably only so many slots. And I think in order to become a household name, you have to figure out a way to become, for many, many people, one of those primary archetypes. And then that's the first half of the career. The second half of the career is figuring out how to individuate yourself from being trapped by that initial. So in other words, so that the artist is now going, okay, this mechanism of fulfilling the role of this pre-existing station of an archetype in the mass psyche, I need to become liberated by that. Okay, and I think, take for example, Marvin Gaye did that when he went from his kind of Motown days to a Trouble Man. So he goes from, being a sort of part of the machinery of Motown. I'm pretty sure it was Motown. It could have been Stax, but I think it was Motown. Whatever. I think it was Detroit based, and it was that overall genre. And then Trouble Man was more like anti-war. It was more like, no, this is me being me. This is the real Marvin Gaye that you can't see, that you wouldn't have been able to see in these records and the productions that he made before. It's almost like he fulfilled something. And in the case of Marvin Gaye, I would think, I don't really know what the best, description of that archetype is, but like, I remember seeing footage of Marvin Gaye, and the women were going absolutely insane for him. Like he would sing, and it seemed like he was almost shy about it. Like he would almost be slightly embarrassed by the fact that the women loved him so much, the way he was a crooner, like in this beautiful way. So I think that was both something that facilitated his career, and then also he probably wanted to be, I don't know, like he wanted to create in new ways, like in the way that he did in Trouble Man with that record, and be taken, I don't want to say more seriously, but like maybe he wanted to be taken like, well, I can't live in that cage, even though that cage got me here, or I can't drive in that car anymore, even though it got me on top of the mountain. I need to fly now, or whatever it is.